Hey everyone, it's Kirk McLean here, and you're watching Clay's Canucks Commentary.
Hey Canucks fans, and welcome to Clay's Canucks Commentary, presented to you by Van City Experts Real Estate. I am your host, Clay Emo Canuck Clay, and this is my Canucks take, all in one take. It is a non-game night. It is Tuesday night, March the 12th. If you're new, here's what you should do. Hit the subscribe button now for daily Canucks insight that's positive, timely, and trustworthy. Friends, let me know in the comments if you can hear me. I have a different setup today because I want to be able to hear Daniel properly and to speak to him. So I'm using my AirPods. Can you still hear me? I can't even tell what's going on. I think my family's out there somewhere. I can't hear anything, but I trust that you can hear me. And I'm so glad that you are here. It's a non-game night, but we certainly have a lot to talk about. So I'm going to rip through all of my pleasantries at the start so we can give Daniel the most time that we can. And don't forget, it's Tuesday night, so I'm off to my church hour at midnight, so I have to finish by 11:45 tonight, no matter how good the conversation is going with Daniel. So moderators, do what you need to do to keep this a safe and respectful place. Members, that's legends, Hall of Fame, and franchise members, thanks for your support as always. And to everyone else, no matter where you're watching from, whether in my beautiful neighborhood of Steveston, Richmond, in the city, Lower Mainland, province, country, continent, or around the world, thank you for being here. You know that I know that you could be doing anything else, watching anyone else, getting ready for work, school, or better, all three. But the fact that you are here with me, know how much I always appreciate you, and I never, ever take you for granted. So this is how you get involved today. You can subscribe to the channel. It gets you active in the chat section and get notified of my videos every single day. You can like this video. There are already 40 of you in here, which is awesome. You guys know my 50% rule. So let's get those likes up to 20 or so at least. Like the fact that the Canucks are winning, like the fact that they're in the middle of a homestand, like the fact that Tyler Myers returned to practice day, and like the fact that we have an award-winning author. Well, he won some type of award. I'm not sure if it's for writing. We'll let him talk about that. But yes, the writer of this book, where I've read two amazing paragraphs from on the stream, he is going to be with us tonight. You can leave a donation and get the donation train out of the station. You can gift memberships. You can buy your own membership, upgrade your own membership. You can use your monthly membership message. And if you're listening on a podcast platform, please rate and review. Now, I'll say one thing. If you do any of those things, I appreciate you, but I might not, I don't want to interrupt my conversation with Daniel. So if you happen to do donations or gift memberships, that's awesome. You should do that, but I'll acknowledge them at the very end of the show. So I hope that makes sense. Yet I hope that doesn't stop you from donating if you want to. Okay, 2 minutes of Canucks news, and then I'll bring Daniel on. So off the ice, two moves. They brought up Artur Silovs to back up Casey DeSmith, obviously. They were able to do it under emergency recall, which means they did not use up one of their 4 recalls. They've used one, but you only get 4 recalls after the trade deadline. So they used up one when they brought up Podkolzin on the weekend after making sure he was down there to be eligible for the AHL playoffs. So out of the 4 recalls, one is gone with Podkolzin. So we get 3 more. But because of the situation, I don't know all the situation, but they were able to use emergency conditions. So that's why Artur Silovs will likely be here for the remainder of this month as Thatcher Demko recovers from his injury. Of course, Rick Tocchet, if you saw it, he did not confirm it was a knee injury, but wink, wink, nudge, nudge, he did admit it was lower body. So no surprise there based on the reporting that we saw yesterday. The other transaction was Dakota Joshua placed on long-term injury reserve. Don't freak out. That doesn't mean he's gone for another month. It simply means he's hit his 24 days. He's hit his 10 games. Now they backdate it to the day he got injured so they can accrue whatever cap savings they can. And don't worry, that doesn't mean he's out for another month. In fact, he should be good to go, hopefully, in the next couple of weeks. And then on the ice today, Tyler Myers returned. He skated as part of the extra pairing with Mark Friedman behind the big 6 right now of Hughes, Hronek, Cole Soucy, Zadorov, and Juleson. And he's not sure. Tocchett's not even sure if Tyler Myers is going to draw into the lineup tomorrow against Colorado, or maybe most likely it's Saturday against Washington, considering Tocchet likes to get his guys to practice at least once or twice. But who knows? And once Myers comes back, because of how well Juleson is playing, is it a matter of a rotation where sometimes Juleson might sit out, maybe Cole because he's the oldest, maybe Zadorov, although Zadorov has played really well. So we'll see. Obviously, you're not taking out Hughes, Hronek, or Soucy. So we'll cross that bridge when we get to it, but things are moving. Things are moving. Of course, the biggest news is Thatcher Demko let's get ready for life without Thatcher for the next 3 weeks. But we got these 8 games spread out over 21 days. So not bad. No back-to-backs. We could conceivably see Casey DeSmith roll with all 8 of those games. But enough about that. Tomorrow night, join me as we do our post game after the late start, 7:30 p.m. start, Vancouver and Colorado. But I want to devote the majority of tonight's show to my guest. So I hope he's ready backstage. I think he is. He's looking good. I know he's going to sound good. So please welcome from Vancouver's Awesome, also known as Pass It to Bulis. This is Mr. Daniel Wagner. Welcome, Daniel.
Thanks for having me, Clay. Happy to be here.
Thanks for sitting through that 5 minutes of rambling. When you're not here, I do that for 45 minutes, not just 5 minutes.
No, it's good. I got a really good update on all the things that I needed to remember about today.
Well, usually I just read your articles, and that's how I do my vlogs, just so you know. So Daniel and I, we've known each other for almost a decade and a half now. Really admire Daniel's work as a writer, as a reporter, and as a co-parody song creator. We've never had a chance to collab together, but although I think I'm getting a little bit too old for it. But Daniel, why don't you tell everyone a bit about yourself and where people can find your work?
Sure. I'm Daniel Wagner. I've been writing the Canucks blog Pass It to Bulis for way too long, since 2010. It's bounced around over the years, but right now I'm at vancouverisawesome.com. You can also find me at passitobulis.com and on most social media platforms as at Passitobulis. So Twitter and my Instagram that I never update and my TikTok that I never update. You can find me in those places as well.
Awesome. No, it's so good. It's through Pass It to Bulis that I got to know and got to admire both Daniel and Harrison is co-founder of that, their work together. And yeah, it's awesome having you on the show. And this is awesome. So I knew this was coming out, this book, Daniel. I knew it was coming out because I saw you tweet about it. And then I guess you recommended me to someone and they sent me this copy. So thank you. I'm very cheap. Well, I'm a content creator, so you didn't know what it's like. So, and then I was so excited. I opened it up on one of my streams, and then someone said, "Read something." I said, "Well, I don't know if Daniel's okay with that." So then I said, "Well, I want to know about Quinn Hughes, Philip Zadina." So I went to that chapter. I read 2 paragraphs, and I think we've sold about a dozen copies now on this show. Yeah. So I put it in the link. I made a tiny URL. So just tinyurl.com/CCC Daniel. That obviously stands for Clay's Canucks Commentary Daniel. And if you want to follow that link, you can actually go order Daniel's book. Here it comes out in a couple of weeks, and then it'll be in your hands within a month. But enough about me. Daniel, how long? Tell me about the genesis of this book and how long it took from tape to tape or tip to tip.
Well, so Triumph Books is the publisher, and they had gotten in touch with me about a previous book idea. Thomas Drance actually connected me with them. He worked on a book, 101 Things a Canucks fan should know and do before they die, I believe is the title of that one. So Drance wrote that one, and he got in touch with them about another book idea, and that book idea actually completely fell through. It didn't work out at all. But then when they came up with this series called On the Clock, they basically have this whole series of draft history books that a lot of NFL books. There's been now a few in the hockey market. And so when they needed someone to write about the draft, they came to me. And you know what? I love writing about the draft. I love writing about prospects. It's something I've been doing right from the very beginning of Pass It to Bulis, where I love doing that research element of it and finding out all sorts of different things about the prospects. So they came to me with it, and I was like, absolutely, I will do this. Except I can't meet your deadline. They wanted me to write it in like a very short period of time. And I'm just like, that is not going to happen. I think they came to me in the summer and were like, do you think you could have it done by Christmas? I'm like, no, I don't.
Wait, summer of 2023 or summer 2022?
Let's see. So that was summer of 2022, and they were like,
okay,
yeah, let's do this now. And I'm like, no, I can't. So negotiated with them, and they came back to me with some more reasonable time frame. So the original writing of it took 9 months.
Okay.
And then there was all sorts of editing and going back and forth, and yeah, It was a long process, but it was a lot of fun. It's actually something that I really enjoy doing is
Yeah.
looking back at the history of the Canucks and reading all the old news articles and talking to people from that time and just getting kind of trying to get to the truth behind some of the legends and myths that Canucks fans have and Canucks media even has about the team's history at the draft. There's a lot of stories that are told, and I kind of wanted to try to tell kind of the definitive version of a lot of those
Awesome.
stories.
That is pretty cool. Now, I love what you said about the timeline, but obviously there was enough back and forth where it took you past June because you list Tom Verlander, Hunter Brzustevich, and the rest of the 2023 draft
Yes.
in there. Yeah.
Yeah. Eventually, things got pushed back. The publishing business. I don't know all of it, the ins and outs of it, but it got pushed around a couple times to some different dates. So yeah,
Yeah.
it ended up being published a little later than intended, but
Yeah.
that's okay.
No, that is awesome. That is awesome. So I'm curious, so I see the 14 chapters and obviously you tell the stories of the PD year, the Hughes year. Was it hard to kind of narrow down the draft years and the draft stories, or is this kind of basically what you wanted to talk about? If it ended up being 14 chapters, so be it.
Yeah, like I think it should be 16 total
Yeah.
chapters, but like
Okay. Yeah.
yeah, it's okay. I'm looking at my draft of it. But yeah, it was more a matter of trying to find the stories that were the most interesting and the most compelling to tell.
Mm,
And so there's 15 full chapters, and then within each chapter there's like another story within that. So there's kind of like 30 draft stories, but even some of the chapters tell the stories of multiple different drafts. So it's trying to cover the entire history of of the draft from 1970 to now. And so there's only so much that you can cover in that time, but I covered a lot of ground, and it was really interesting trying to figure out which stories to tell and which ones maybe just you don't tell. A lot of
yeah.
people were going, "Oh, well, what about this draft where, this guy never turned up and never turned into anything?" And a lot of the times that story was this guy was good and then he got hurt and then he wasn't good after he got hurt. And that's not a really fun story to tell. It's just like,
Right.
you know, he was a good hockey player and then he
Yeah.
got hurt and then he wasn't a good hockey player anymore. And
Yes.
that's just kind of a sad story. It's not like anyone really messed up or made a mistake
Right.
or they did made a bad decision. It's just sometimes players get hurt. So a lot of it was more trying to tell the good stories, the more interesting stories. Where did this great player come from? How did they get him? Or this great player that the Canucks traded away, how did they
Mm,
draft him and why did they trade him away after? And so that ended up being more the story of the book, is trying to find those interesting, compelling stories and tell those stories rather than just try to go, well, let's talk about every single player that has ever been drafted by the Canucks. And it just no, that doesn't work.
no, that makes a lot of sense. And I must admit, I haven't read it completely yet because I have to finish. I'm finishing my master's. I'm going to finish that in April, and this will be the first thing I'm reading on the plane on the way down. So, but in flipping through it, it's very readable. It definitely sounds like your voice. Da da da. When I read the 2-paragraph excerpt that I sent you about Quinn Hughes, and we had that nice back and forth kind of offline. And yeah, I would just love, you don't have to recap the entire chapter, but what stood out to you because it's so fresh in our minds and we see that Quinn Hughes is doing so well for us now as our captain. What stands out to you from that particular story? Just, is it simply, and I don't want to give it away, but is it simply that Detroit passed up on him despite the fact that he played there? Like, what kind of stood out to you from that Quinn Hughes draft year and writing that chapter?
Sure. I mean, there's some interesting things there. I really enjoyed kind of looking into the influence that Ellen Hughes had on the Hughes boys and how she was their first coach when they were younger. That was kind of fun to find out about. But for me, the really compelling thing that I found out and that I tell in the book is that, the Red Wings, even if they didn't draft Zadina, were never going to draft Hughes. Like that's the
Wow.
really fascinating thing, is that it wasn't Zadina falling that got the Canucks Hughes. the Red Wings were going to take a different defenseman entirely. They were focused on defensemen in that draft. The only thing that Zadina falling did was made it so that they didn't take a defenseman. So
Right.
that to me was really interesting. And
Huh.
like that's a story that had kind of been told in the media here and there. And I just kind of confirmed some of the pieces of it and tried to put it all together. But yeah,
Yeah.
it was not that the Red Wings were going to take Hughes. They didn't want Hughes. They had other defensemen higher on the list. The team that
Wow.
was really a threat to take Hughes was the Coyotes.
And they
And
picked
so
at
they picked
five. Jared Hayden,
Hayden.
right? Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And so that was the big thing. Like if the Coyotes had if they didn't have Hayton over Hughes on their list, they would have taken Hughes. Hughes was the next guy on their list. So
Yeah.
that was
Yeah.
the real risk there. It wasn't the Red Wings, it was the Coyotes.
And it's funny the way you talked about that. They wanted Hayden, obviously, because they took him. But we're watching on our TVs home, and we're like, okay, wow, the fact that Arizona took Hayden, that's a name that none of us, at least I don't remember hearing a lot about it, at least for Vancouver. So as we saw Hughes just kind of being on it's so fascinating to hear that story, Daniel, because of course my untrained eye, I just think, oh my gosh, in Detroit, it's either going to be Zadina or it's going to be Hughes or it's going to be Hughes, and then we'll be stuck with someone else, and they weren't even on. Hughes wasn't even on their radar as their first
No,
defenseman. Wow.
and so many like the one of the things that people need to realize about the draft is that when you see the public lists and like every public scouting service has their own list, and they're usually pretty similar. They might be
Mhm.
higher on one player or another. NHL teams have wildly different lists. Like you'd be amazed when you find out, like, because what they often do is if they don't like a player that everyone else has in the top 10,
Mm,
they'll just put them on a do not draft list, like DND.
mm.
They'll just like, no, we're not even going to bother with this guy. We don't want him. Everybody else wants him. He's going to get picked in the top 10, so we don't even care. We're not even going to list him.
Yeah.
And they'll be really high on certain prospects that you would never expect, like the Coyotes being so high on Hayton. Like they had
Mm.
Kachuk, Hayton, Hughes. That was the
Wow.
list that they had, and they had all of those players ahead of Zadina. And so that was
Yes.
a very different list from what everybody in the public sphere saw and what other NHL teams had. The Canucks had a wildly different list that year too. So it just is, it's very interesting that we kind of judge them based on what we see in these public lists. Maybe
Yes.
if you have the time, you look at some of the prospects yourself and you decide, oh, I like this guy, I like this guy. NHL teams just end up with wildly different lists that
Wow.
don't resemble each other at all.
Do you know, Daniel? One of my viewers suggested that it was Bouchard. Do you know if it's Bouchard, Dobson, or Boquist that Detroit wanted?
I'd have to
I'm just curious if you know off the top of your head. Don't sweat it. Yeah. Yeah.
I'd have to remember. I'm actually looking at my draft here. Yeah, it was Bouchard. They had Bouchard, and there were some people who suggested, and I couldn't confirm this firmly, that they had both Bouchard and Dobson ranked ahead of Hughes.
Right. Right.
So
And yeah,
just
those are two. Yeah, those are
very
two
different.
excellent players.
Good
Yeah.
defense.
Yeah. Of course. Of course. But I don't think there's one person in my chat right now that would say they'll take one of those two guys.
No thanks. No.
Yeah. Oh, that's a very cool story. Okay, I got one more, and just tell me if I'm getting too granular here. But I love these. Do you touch in the book on the whole Pedersen versus Cody Glass discussion? I wasn't.
Oh,
Yeah.
100%. That's a whole chapter on Elias Pettersson and how the Canucks ended up drafting him. And yes, that debate is part of it. Very,
Wow.
very much part of it. I'll tell you a little bit about that. Like,
Yeah, I'd love to.
what
Yeah.
I found really interesting is that the divide within the Canucks themselves and the divide within the NHL as a whole was the scouts who primarily watched Pedersen in Sweden in like on his club team, regular season. It was them versus the scouts who primarily saw Pedersen at international tournaments.
Mm.
That was where the divide really was. And so I actually kind of defend Jim Benning a little bit in the chapter, because people go, oh, he wanted Cody Glass. He wanted Cody Glass. He would have had lots of chances to see Cody Glass, very few chances to see Pettersson in person himself. And so the only time he really got a chance to see Pettersson aside from video would have been at international tournaments where he wasn't that good.
Right.
Pettersson actually, like, he kind of struggled in those international tournaments. And so and that was true across the NHL. A lot of NHL teams who did more scouting at international tournaments or put more weight in how they performed against their peers in international tournaments didn't think that highly of Pettersson. Some had him way down in the first round, like the back half of the first round. Whereas the scouts who really poured their attention into their regular season, how they performed for their club, loved Pettersson and had, like, all those teams who really put a lot of weight on how they performed in the regular season had Pettersson like in their top 10. So there was a huge divide there. And so I think that is one of the main divides within the Canucks room, is that there was these scouts who primarily saw him in international tournaments and were like, what's all the fuss? We don't get it. Convince us. And to the Canucks' credit, I think Trevor Linden deserves a lot of credit for really pushing, like, hey, let's have this conversation. Let's really get it out there and have everybody's voice heard. They had that argument, and the scouts who had seen him more, they convinced Benning and the other side that, no, this is the way we have to go. We have to go with Pettersson over Glass. And I think a lot of it with Cody Glass is that Jim Benning liked him and wanted the scouts to really take another look at him and go, hey, why isn't he higher on our list? And so I don't think, like, we kind of get into this idea of like Pettersson versus Glass. It's like, yeah, Benning wanted Glass, don't get me wrong, but I think there's a good reason for it. He hadn't seen Pettersson perform at his peak like he did in Sweden for his club team.
Wow. Oh, okay. Forget about my studying. I'm going to read that chapter tonight. I think that sounds fascinating to me. Oh, thank you for sharing that. And everyone in the chat, thank you. Keep those questions coming, but I'm going to, in about 10 minutes, I'm basically going to ask you to retype your questions, and Daniel has agreed to answer some of your questions before he goes tonight, which is awesome. So I'm going to pepper Daniel with my own questions for the next 10 minutes, and then we'll leave the last 10 minutes for all of you. I noticed in the book as well, you have dedicated chapters to the 3 Stanley Cup final teams, 82, 94, 2011. So that's pretty cool. Anything from either of those 3 years that you learned actually forget about those 3 years, just anything in the book that you, maybe it was a wives' tale or a folklore story, and then you said, wow, this is way more fascinating, way more deep than I thought.
I mean, there's a bunch of those, which was kind of the fun part of it, is that, like, so many of the stories that, you hear growing up as a Canucks fan, they're either not fully correct or like just details were not quite right. I think the interesting thing with the Stanley Cup years is the 82 team not built through the draft. The 94 team not built through the draft either, really. It was Bure, Linden, and then Sean Antoski and Gino Ojic. I think those were the only 4 drafted players on that team. And so I go into that chapter and go like, well, why weren't there more Canucks draft picks on that team? That's a fun story. But then the 2011 team, a lot more draft picks on that team. So it was very, very different construction for each of those years. And so it was fun to kind of look into those stories. But I think the one chapter that'll probably end up being maybe a little controversial or a little surprising, and it surprised me, was the Pavel Bure chapter, because I think that story is very different from the story that we've kind of heard over the years.
Okay. I like that. So, spoiler, we're not going to give away that entire chapter here. You got to order the book.
Buy the book and read that chapter.
That is amazing. Okay, last question about the book, then I'll ask you about this year's team. Are the Canucks aware of it? Did they support it? Did they not support it? Have they given you any feedback? Does it matter?
I don't think it matters. For me, I think one of the benefits of writing this as an independent journalist rather than someone working for the Canucks writing the story, because I think a lot of the time what we hear about the history of the Canucks comes from the Canucks organization. It's often people who work for the Canucks telling stories, and it's great. It's great to hear those stories from a lot of the people who have worked for the Canucks, played for the Canucks over the years. For me, getting to the truth behind the stories was kind of the whole point of it. And so I mean, I was in communication with the Canucks about this. They knew I was writing this book. I had to go through them to try to talk to certain people. And so, yeah, like it's not like the Canucks weren't aware of it, but yeah, it's not like I'm not connected to the Canucks. And I think that actually is a benefit for the book, because it means that I can, tell the story a little more objectively rather than as a, Canucks cheerleader, as it were.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Yeah, no one wants a Canucks cheerleader at all. So, no, all right. I that better less said than okay. And then, what's so funny? The fact that you mentioned Canucks and draft in the same sentence, and already people in the chat ask him about Yolevy, ask him about Britannia, ask him about McCann. Hold on. We'll get to that. Okay. So we got 5 more minutes before we get to people's questions. Daniel, what's it like? So I mentioned to you before we press record that or go live that, I watch every single press conference, every single, post game, pre game, I get to hear you among the cast of regulars there. Is it any different? And I'm not talking about COVID. I'm not talking about protocol, just vibe, confidence, how the guys are speaking. Is there a different vibe in the dressing room, or is it kind of being business as usual? Like, especially with we're talking around it now for a full year. What's it been like?
Well, it's actually interesting that, like, I'm working on an article kind of about that, like what the vibe is in the room. So I talked to several players about it today, and it is like what you see in like interviews and stuff like that is they're very businesslike, very down to brass tacks. Like, they are. You ask them, oh, well, that was a really good game. You played really well. It's like, yeah, we'll look at the video and we'll look at what we did wrong. And it's like, you just had a great win. And but it's a very interesting vibe within the room that it is as businesslike as it seems. It's they're just very focused on the task at hand, to the point that one of the things that I was asking the players today is like, are you guys having fun? Like, is this fun? And like, they're all saying, well, yeah, it's fun. We're absolutely having fun. But it's a very interesting kind of fun. Ian Cole talked about today, talked about how it's like, you do whatever you like, whatever, keeps you happy, keeps you things light and keeps you relaxed. But at 7:07, when that puck drops, it's business time. Like we're not fooling around anymore. When the puck drops, we're down to business. And I think you see that as well. When the team wins, they're celebrating, they're happy, the music's pumping in the room. As soon as the music turns off in the room, straight back down to business. And so it's a very interesting vibe for sure. So, and it is different from last year. Last year was, the last several seasons, of course, have been pretty tough as a whole. The mood in the room is often very low because they were losing so much, and it's not fun. Like Tyler Myers today, when I talked to him about it, he was just like, yeah, winning's fun. Last season it was not as much fun as this season. So, winning solves a lot of things, but I think they've gotten to this point by being so focused, and they're not letting themselves, get sidetracked at all. They're having fun in the moment, but as soon as that moment passes, they're going, okay, how do we get better for next game? It is as business-like in that room as it seems from the outside.
Well, great answer, Daniel. Thank you for taking us behind the curtain there. Even it's funny you mentioned Tyler Myers, because even in the Vancouver Canucks Twitter account showed, he was laughing, he was giggling, he was talking about, hey, didn't you see me? I played the whole game, which we knew he didn't. It was really funny actually. You could just tell he was relaxed and happy and excited to get back to playing and to being with his teammates.
Yeah, but even within that, it was interesting kind of talking to him about how he was still analyzing, Even when he was out of the lineup, even when he was injured, he was still analyzing and going, well, this is what we're doing right. This is what we're doing wrong. This is how I can improve. This is how I can contribute when I'm back in the lineup. So it's like they are having fun. Things are pretty light in that room. It's not like there's anything dour or grim in the room. But even talking to players that, normally they might joke around a little bit, the things are pretty serious when you talk to them. It's an interesting vibe in that room for sure. But it does feel like, I know they use that unfinished business slogan that kind of people poked fun at a little bit, but it legitimately this season, the entire season kind of feels like that, because they're like, okay, we have this, we have to win in the regular season, but that's not the real business that we have to get to. That comes later. We're really focused on game by game, but we just want to get to the playoffs and succeed there.
And I presume that unfinished business, or that business as usual, comes from what they always refer to as their leadership group, who I presume are guys like JT Miller and Quinn Hughes and PD and Myers. Is that fair to say?
I think that is fair to say. I think a lot of it comes from the coaching staff as well, just kind of going like, hey, if like the leadership group knows where they want to go. Like Pettersson in particular, he's like, before he got to the NHL, he was used to winning. He was very used to winning. And I think this has been a very frustrating time for him. And I think part of the reason why he waited to sign was he did want to see some proof that, this team can succeed the way it is currently constructed. Like, this team can win games. This team can potentially go far in the playoffs. And I think that leadership group, like, they want to succeed. And I think the coaching staff has taken that and gone, okay, if this is where you want to get to, this is what you have to do. This is the approach that you have to have. This is the culture that you have to build. This is what you have to do. So I think that coaching staff has taken that leadership's desire and given it structure. And I know structure is such a word for the Canucks this season, but I'm not talking about like on ice structure. I'm literally talking about like off ice structure. This is the structure you need. Some call it culture, whatever you want to call it. If you want to get to this level, and you say you do, here's what you have to do to get there.
Awesome. All right, friends in the chat, thank you for being so patient. Daniel, thank you for answering all those questions so well. We got last 10 minutes. Daniel's graciously offered to answer your questions. You got to get through me though. Canuck Clay is screening them, but yes, put your questions in the chat. And Daniel, very quick answer, please, just while we're waiting for a couple of questions. Who's your favorite Canuck player to deal with when it comes to media, asking questions, and giving you good answers?
Right now, it's probably Ian Cole. He's he's been around for a long time. He knows how to answer questions thoroughly and in an interesting way. He's got an interesting perspective from years playing for Stanley Cup teams too. So he's great to talk to. He's like a go-to. If the team loses, he's a guy to talk to, because he'll give a great perspective on that. Haven't had to talk to him after a loss too often this season, which is nice.
Good. Awesome. Jason, I can answer at least in my version, there's about 300 pages. 385 pages. 305 pages, which is pretty good. Is there going to be an audiobook? Audio version?
Honestly, I don't know an answer to that question yet. That's something that I need to talk to my publisher about.
Awesome.
I would love to have an audio version available for it. I know that there's plenty of fans out there who love audiobooks, who kind of treat it like almost like a podcast, a chaptered podcast.
Let me know if you need a reader, because I'm 2 paragraphs up on everyone else. So just so you know.
But yeah, that's something I do want to. I do want to talk to Triumph about that and see if that is something that can be done, but I'm not sure.
Awesome. Edmund says, do you touch on Zack Kassian? And if you think he could have been great if he didn't have off-ice issues?
No, I don't really get into Zack Kassian because he wasn't drafted by the Canucks. I believe he gets mentioned when I talk about Cody Hodgson, but no, Kassian doesn't get mentioned as much. But yeah, that's a tough one. Like he went through a lot off the ice, and I think he could have potentially been better. But I think like what we saw with in Edmonton when he kind of got things sorted out off the ice, that's kind of the player that you kind of expect him to be, a middle six winger who, you know, maybe is a little reckless, but
Right.
yeah, I don't know that he could be at that same at the level that people kind of expected him to be when he was drafted.
Good answer. Thank you,
Some
Darren.
players don't get there.
Yes, Darren and Victoria. I'm wondering if you're doing any type of promo tour or a book signing.
Yes, I'll be doing a book signing. Believe it is March 30th at the People's Co-op bookstore in
Where's
Vancouver.
that? Awesome.
So yeah, People's Co-op bookstore. It's in Vancouver. It's pretty easy to find if you Google
Darren,
it.
that's a Saturday, so come on over. Book a ferry, come on over and meet Daniel. I'm going to try and hey, oh, that sounds cool. That sounds really cool. Then I leave for Vegas the next day on Easter Sunday of all days for that road trip that we're going on, which is pretty cool. Fangirl says, what was your favorite chapter to write and why?
I really enjoyed writing the Pavel Bure chapter, as I mentioned.
Yep.
The Sedin chapter was really fascinating to write because there were so many moving pieces. So trying to piece that together, I sometimes felt like I was on a cork board with like red string, like trying to,
Yes.
well, what happened here? Because there's some parts of that story that don't really get told, because there was the
Right.
Tampa Bay Lightning had a whole ownership issue that could have
Wow.
scuttled the entire deal. That yeah,
Sure.
it's a
Yeah, we do.
whole mess.
Oh, we hear the Brian Burke story, which is good. Obviously, he was one of the main orchestrator, but still, yeah. I can't wait. I'm definitely not going to study. I'm going to read that chapter right after I read the Pedersen
No,
chapter.
you should study. You should study. I tried to do a master's once, and it didn't work out very well because
Okay.
I didn't devote any time to it because of the Canucks.
Good. That's good life advice. I will take it. Irvin says, Daniel, do you think that because of the team's success in his era, fans give Mike Gillis because of the team success?
Yeah,
Basically the question is,
yeah,
go ahead.
They kind of overlook the draft failures because
Right.
of the team success.
Yeah.
It was interesting. Like, I talked to Mike Gillis for the book, and one of the things that I asked him is like, do you wish that you had traded away more of your first round picks to maybe see if you could go for, some other player that would have helped more? Because the draft, one of the things that people need to realize is that when you get into the back half of the first round, those picks are not much different from second round picks.
Right.
There's a major drop off, and when I've talked to other scouts about this, but Gillis makes the point in the book itself that after the top 10, and sometimes even before that, there's often a huge drop off in talent. And so I think the team was so good during the Gillis era that you kind of go, okay, the drafting wasn't great, but the team was good, so it doesn't matter. But like, some of those picks weren't great. Jordan Schrader, he didn't do great. I mean, he had an NHL career. It's not like he was nothing. Nicholas Jensen, not a great pick. Absolutely. I love Brendan Gaunce, so you'll never convince me that Brendan Gaunce was a bad pick. I love that guy. But yeah,
it's funny you mentioned Schrader. It's funny you mentioned Schrader because someone actually mentioned him in the chat earlier. That's funny. Yeah.
Yeah, like the draft wasn't good during the Gillis era. I think a lot of that was maybe there was some kind of big braining to it. They drafted a lot of overage players hoping that they could contribute sooner. And it turns out there's a reason why teams don't generally draft overage players. Another thing was that they didn't really change the leadership in the scouting department until much later in his tenure. And that was something that both he and Lawrence Gilman have said they wish they had changed that scouting staff earlier and put in different leadership. I think that would have made a big difference, because we saw as soon as Gillis was gone, that same scouting staff started to find some gems.
Yes.
But the big one too, the big one that I talked to Gillis about was the Bo Horvat draft, that whole thing, and that was really interesting. That's a fun chapter, because I go into not just Horvat but the planned rebuild that should have started with Horvat.
Oh, beautiful. All right. Man, I could go all night, but I got to get to my church. So we got time for 2 more questions.
Okay.
Justin says, let's go. What was the greatest challenge about writing this book? And are there plans for a sequel?
It was definitely a challenge finding some of the people that I wanted to talk to. Some of the people were a little difficult to find and to connect with. that was definitely challenging. But that ended up being rewarding too. Like, again, I've mentioned the Bure chapter a couple times, but one of the people that I talked to for the Bure chapter was hard to find, and I ended up weirdly connecting to him through my old Yahoo email address. It was a whole weird sequence of events, but tracking them down and finding the right person to talk to for some of those chapters was definitely a challenge. But
Nice.
yeah, just also writing the book while also writing like 2,000 plus words a day for the blog itself. That was a bit of a challenge as well. As
Love
for
it.
a sequel or
Yeah.
more books, possibly. One of the things that my contract with Triumph includes is a potential update. If the book sells really well, then there could be another edition of the book that would include more stories, more current stories. As for more books, yeah, I'd love to write more books. I'd like to write all sorts of stuff. I love writing. I've actually got ideas for fiction stories too. It's a whole thing. But yeah.
All right. Well, this community is going to do our part to prop up your name with Triumph for sure. And finally, another great content creator. Hey, Trev. Trev says, I don't know if you can get into this. Why did the Canucks draft Virtanen over Nylander or Ehlers? This is what we're going to end with.
Absolutely. Great. Okay. I love talking about Jake Virtanen. So people want to look for someone to blame for Virtanen. I think that's a big part of it is it's like, okay, who was it that wanted him and why? But here's the problem. Everybody wanted Virtanen in the Canucks room. Benning wanted Virtanen. Linden wanted Virtanen. Aquilini wanted Virtanen for multiple reasons. Benning talked about meat and potatoes. You want that guy that skates fast and only knows how to skate fast down the wing and shoot from a bad angle. You got to have that guy. But yeah, there was and the scouting department didn't put like the people who would have pushed back on that were not listened to. And I see in the chat, actually, someone made this point. It wasn't just Linden. It wasn't just Benning. It wasn't just Aquilini. A lot of fans wanted Virtanen too. He was that West Coast power forward. A lot of fans get it in their heads that, you don't want to overlook guys in the WHL just because they're in your backyard. Like that, not enough players drafted from the WHL. That's been a big complaint from a lot of Canucks fans. And they want that, I think the Canucks, just as a general whole, as a spiritual entity, have been chasing after Cam Neely ever since he was traded away. And so I think there is just so much of that the people who wanted to push back against drafting Virtanen, who wanted instead, there was a lot of Canuck scouts that wanted Nylander, especially. Nylander was like, their Swedish scouts loved Nylander, but they weren't listened to. And eventually down the line, that was something that Linden in particular addressed with having a more in-depth discussion surrounding the draft and making sure that every single scout had their voice heard, which is why you ended up with Pettersson, which is why you ended up with Hughes. The scouts were heard more. Pettersson in particular. Hughes, everyone loved Hughes. Don't get me wrong. Everybody loved Hughes. Hughes, there was no debate over Hughes. Literally everyone in the Canucks room wanted Hughes. But yeah, with Virtanen, the big issue was that the decision makers loved him and the people who didn't weren't heard. Wow.
Well, truly, I don't know why I brought you on the night where I have to cut I want to respect your time and your family time. Daniel, you're awesome, man. Truly, not just Vancouver's awesome. Daniel Wagner is awesome. I appreciate you, and I think maybe I'll connect with you another time. Maybe I'll give away a couple books on the stream. We'll figure that out, and we'll bring you on maybe after the book's been out for a month, kind of thing, and we could tell a couple more stories if you're open to it.
Absolutely, that sounds like a lot of fun.
Thank you, Daniel. Well, on behalf of the entire chat, I will say thank you. I'll let you go. I'll pop you backstage so then you get back to whatever you're doing, and I'll wrap up the show. So once again, thanks for not only this book, this awesome book that we're gonna pump to the top of the bestsellers list on Amazon, but thanks for being one of the mainstays in trustworthy local Canucks coverage. And I know how much I appreciate reading your stuff and following your work. So thanks again for taking the time to join us tonight.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. Thank you, everyone.
All right, man. We'll see you soon. Thanks again. All right, friends. That was Daniel Wagner. Pass it to Bulis. Vancouver is awesome. And thank you. We once again thank Daniel for his time, especially jumping on at the absurd time of 11 p.m. So I got to wrap up the show in the next 3 minutes so I can get to my church hour. So thank you to all of you for being here, asking great questions. Make sure you go buy Daniel's book. I put the link there, tinyurl.com/ccc-Daniel. And it comes out in the next 2 or 3 weeks. And like he said, he's doing a book signing March 30th in Vancouver. I want to thank all the moderators for keeping this a safe and respectful place. I want to thank all the members, legendary Lucas Gates, legendary Carol Bovelander, legendary Andrew Chang, Hall of Fame and franchise members for your support. And thanks to all of you for watching, liking, and subscribing. On the way out, you can subscribe to the channel. You can like the video. You can leave a late donation. You can gift a membership. Buy your own membership, upgrade your own membership, and you can, if you're listening on a podcast platform, make sure you rate and review. I will upload it as soon as I get back from my holy hour. So thanks once again, as always. And Daniel, thank you for your time. And join me tomorrow night at 11 p.m. after the conclusion of the Vancouver Canucks and the Colorado Avalanche. So until then, stay safe, stay healthy, take care of yourselves, and take care of each other. And did I tell you that Gail, whose birthday is in 13 minutes, who I won't celebrate because I'll be at my church, Gail actually threatened to leave me once because she told me I was getting too obsessed with astronomy. I was like, what planet are you on? God bless, and go Canucks go. Booyah.